Okay, let's jump right in. Modern warfare. Well, it isn't confined to physical battlefields anymore, is it?
Not at all.
Increasingly, it seems like it's fought just as fiercely, maybe more fiercely sometimes, in the information space.
Mhm. The domain where controlling the story, the narrative,
Yeah.
that can be as decisive as any kinetic action, really,
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. This absolute critical need for India to really master this narrative warfare.
especially now.
Yeah, especially in light of some, well, very significant recent events. We've gathered quite a bit of material that really lays this challenge bare, and it proposes a path forward.
It does. It paints a clear picture.
So our mission for this deep dive really is to unpack why controlling the narrative isn't secondary anymore. It's a vital
Yeah.
part of national security.
Absolutely vital.
And what does that actually look like in practice? Because, the recent military response we've been looking at, tactically a success,
On the ground, yes.
but it also highlighted this pretty stark gap in the narrative battle.
A major gap.
The event that really hammered this home, kind of the wake-up call, was that horrific terror attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir.
Yes, that terrible day, April 22nd, 2025. Just a devastating loss. 26 civilians killed.
Mostly tourists, right?
25 Indian tourists and 1 Nepali national. And the material we have points directly, very clearly to a Pakistan-based group, Lashkar-e-Taiba.
And this wasn't, just some isolated tragedy. The material suggests this was deliberate, calculated,
Oh, absolutely. It seems designed specifically to provoke a response from India. They knew what they were doing.
setting the stage, basically.
Exactly. Knowing a reaction was, well, pretty much inevitable.
Which leads us to India's response. Operation Sindoor, launched May 7th, 2025.
A very precise, measured response. Looking at the details, India conducted airstrikes, targeted 9 terrorist hideouts.
And crucially, these weren't military targets.
No, that's key. The strikes were across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, Poke, and also mainland Pakistan, but hitting terror infrastructure only, not military bases.
That distinction feels really important. It seems like an effort to hit the source of terror, not escalate into a full state-on-state thing.
Precisely. And the operation itself, militarily speaking, was executed with incredible strategic finesse.
How so?
Well, Indian jets struck deep, but without actually crossing the border in the conventional sense, using standoff weapons. And they used cyber ops, too, temporarily blinding Pakistani radar, ensuring those strikes were pinpoint accurate.
So from a purely military perspective, the picture painted is pretty successful, restrained yet resolute.
I'd say a masterclass, really. It showed India's capability, its willingness to respond decisively to terror coming from Pakistan, while also clearly signaling we don't want a wider war. So, on the ground, militarily, a win.
And this is the big but, isn't it?
Mm.
Here's where the narrative war kicked off immediately, and frankly where things got messy, fast.
Yeah.
While India was focused on executing this flawless military strike, the material shows someone else was already dominating the story in those critical first hours.
We saw Pakistan launch an immediate, aggressive narrative counterattack. They didn't wait.
No hesitation.
None. Media channels, social media,
Okay.
just flooded instantly with claims of Indian aggression, fabricated stories of civilian casualties.
Oh.
They were actively trying to flip the script, paint India as the villain, and completely ignoring, conveniently, the brutal Pahalgam attack that triggered the whole thing.
And the speed. You mentioned speed. That seems key.
Incredible speed. This false narrative just spread like wildfire online globally before India's official information could even, get its boots
And
on.
the consequence of that speed.
That's the critical part. By the time India released its evidence, and it was irrefutable evidence, satellite imagery showing terror camps hit, debunking those civilian casualty claims.
Right.
The proof, Pakistan's version had already gone viral. It had already shaped those crucial initial global perceptions.
Right.
First impressions matter hugely.
And we saw that play out, didn't we? In global news outlets, places like CNN, Al Jazeera, they often framed it through this lens of escalation. Like, oh, here go the 2 nuclear neighbors squabbling again.
Exactly. Rather than explicitly framing it as, a state that just suffered a major terror attack, responding directly to the source of that attack.
It felt, the analogy used in the material is pretty sharp. Like blaming the firefighter for water damage while the house is still burning down.
That's a good way to put it. The crucial context that the Pahalgam massacre got lost, or at least diluted, in that rush to report both sides of a narrative.
Where one side was the aggressor initiating terror.
And the other was responding to it. But that nuance gets flattened.
And look, we've seen echoes of this before, haven't we? Remember the narrative confusion around the Balakot strikes back in 2019?
Absolutely. The material points out Operation Sindoor was, perhaps, better handled in some ways. India did release visuals faster this time. And Pakistan even sort of admitted past support for terror groups, which was interesting. But clearly, it still wasn't enough to control the narrative globally, not decisively.
It's like you just won the physical fight, but your opponent immediately releases their movie version where you're the bad guy.
And you're letting them write the script. That's the danger.
Which brings us to this core concept the material explores. This idea of a sixth domain of warfare.
Exactly. So you've got the traditional domains land, sea, air, space, and cyber.
Right.
And now, increasingly recognized, there's narrative. It's about controlling the fundamental story. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What's really at stake? Why is this happening? And ultimately, what outcome should the world support?
And the power of this domain. I mean, how powerful is it, really?
It's immense, and you could argue its impact is growing faster than the others, especially in terms of immediate effect. Narratives build or break alliances. They swing international public opinion. They can literally influence whether a conflict escalates or de-escalates based purely on how it's perceived.
So in this specific case, May 2025.
Pakistan used this domain strategically, like a chess master. They didn't achieve a military victory, obviously. But by shaping the narrative so quickly, they aimed for a perceptual victory.
Making themselves look like the underdog, the victim.
Exactly. Rather than the state linked, again, to the terror group that started the whole cycle with Pahalgam.
And in our world today, hyper-connected information traveling at the speed of a click. That perception can become reality pretty damn fast for a lot of people.
It absolutely can. Especially, when you're talking about a region where the stakes are incredibly high. A 2019 study highlighted the potential. A nuclear exchange could kill up to 125 million people in a week.
Unbelievable stake.
So every single tweet, every headline, every viral video, it potentially matters. It carries weight.
And we saw specific examples, didn't we, of Pakistan sort of scoring points in this narrative battle.
We did. Claims of downing Indian jets, for instance,
Yeah.
completely fabricated, zero evidence ever shown.
Right, never proven.
But they still got reported in some outlets globally. Just enough to sow doubt, to muddy the waters.
And the media appearances.
Think about Al Jazeera, for example. Panels featuring Pakistani spokesmen pushing their narrative, often getting significant airtime, while perhaps India's perspective was less prominent or came later. The result? A global audience, maybe detached from the initial horror of Pahalgam, starts wondering, well, maybe India was the aggressor here, simply because that was the loudest, earliest story they heard.
It's like getting blamed for starting a fight in a bar when you were the one who got sucker punched and were just defending yourself.
That's a really apt analogy. That initial framing, who defines the terms of the debate first, it matters enormously.
So if this isn't exactly a new problem for India, we saw it in 2019, clearly played out again in 2025. The big question hangs there. Why does India seem to keep, dropping the ball on telling its own story effectively?
Yeah, it's a critical question. The material identifies several key reasons. One big one is this inherent tension, this conflict between operational secrecy.
Which you need for military success.
Absolutely essential for missions like Operation Sindoor. You can't compromise that. But that secrecy clashes directly with the need for rapid, transparent communication for narrative control.
So the focus during the OPM was flawless execution.
Understandably, yes. But it meant the narrative prep, the communication strategy, lagged way behind Pakistan's proactive propaganda machine, which was likely ready to go.
It's like you're totally focused on playing the perfect hand of poker while your opponent is busy showing everyone else their hand and telling them you cheated.
Precisely. And another reason is that India's communication often tends to be reactive, not proactive.
Playing catch-up.
Always playing catch-up. That false Pakistani narrative was halfway around the world before India's factual evidence, the satellite images, even got properly disseminated. You're constantly on the back foot, debunking lies that have already taken hold.
And is there a structural issue, too?
That seems to be a third challenge, yes. A lack of a truly centralized, empowered body specifically for this. You have different ministries, external affairs, defense, home, information and broadcasting, plus the military, often operating in their own silos. This can lead to disjointed messaging, delays as information has to pass through multiple bureaucratic layers.
They're like trying to get a choir to sing in perfect harmony when everyone's got a slightly different song sheet, or maybe they're starting at different times.
Exactly that. Now, contrast this with, say, Pakistan, where the military often exerts very tight control and coordination over media messaging, especially during crises.
Right.
Or China, which explicitly practices what they call informationized warfare, integrating all information capabilities, propaganda, cyber, psychological operations, under state control.
Now, obviously, India can't and shouldn't copy those authoritarian models.
No, absolutely not. India is a vibrant democracy, free press, that's a strength. But the current approach, often decentralized, often reactive, is clearly struggling against opponents who are highly organized and incredibly proactive in this information domain.
So the challenge is, how does a democracy fight a 21st century information war? Especially when adversaries are using these highly centralized 21st century tactics, and India sometimes feels like it's responding with, well, maybe a 20th century PR approach in a crisis.
Which leads us directly to the solution that's strongly proposed in the material we've looked at.
Okay, what is it?
India needs a dedicated statutory body, something focused specifically on strategic communication. Essentially, a narrative warfare force.
A narrative warfare force. Okay, tell us more about that. What's the core purpose? How would it actually work?
Right. The material is very clear on this point. This is not about creating a government propaganda machine. It's not about spinning lies.
Important distinction.
Crucial. The purpose is to deliver the truth. And this is the key to do so with unprecedented speed, clarity, and strategic impact.
So like a storytelling SWAT team.
That's a great way to think about it. A highly specialized cross-functional team, armed not just with facts, but with a deep understanding of global information ecosystems, data analytics, and frankly, a knack for making truthful information travel fast and resonate widely.
Who would need to be on this kind of dream team? What kind of expertise?
You would have to pull the best from across different fields. You'd need people from external affairs, defense, home affairs, information and broadcasting. Definitely senior military officers who understand the operational context, but also information dynamics. Crucially, you'd need media professionals, people who get modern communication, social media, visuals, cognitive psychologists to understand how messages actually land with different global audiences.
Data scientists too, I imagine.
Absolutely. Data scientists to track narrative trends in real time, see what's gaining traction, and AI experts to help identify and maybe even counter disinformation rapidly. It's a diverse skill set.
Sounds like the kind of group you'd want brainstorming over chai, figuring out how to make the truth trend globally.
Hopefully. And their functions would be critical. First, real-time response. This unit needs to operate 21/7.
Around the clock.
With the explicit mandate and the capability to counter lies before they take root. Imagine, during Operation Sindor, having OSINT experts, communication specialists ready to go, releasing validated satellite imagery, other debunking evidence for that civilian casualties claim within hours, not days.
Because speed is everything.
Speed is absolutely everything when you're fighting viral disinformation. Once a lie gets traction, correcting it is 10 times harder, maybe 100 times.
Okay, what else?
Second function, global reach, local touch. This force wouldn't just broadcast one message. It would tailor communication for different audiences. Global leaders need certain information. The Indian public needs reassurance and clarity. The diaspora needs connection. Specific regional populations might need culturally nuanced messages.
So the evidence released after the 2025 strikes. Good for analysts, maybe.
Exactly. Convincing for analysts, yes. But it didn't necessarily go viral on platforms like Twitter or TikTok, where Pakistan's narrative was booming. Right. This force could turn dry facts into compelling visuals, into shareable content. Work with diplomats to strategically place op-eds in key global newspapers. Ensure India's side isn't just available, but it's seen and understood everywhere it needs to be.
Literally turning satellite images of demolished terror camps into, I don't know, viral content that resonates.
Precisely. Maybe not memes exactly, but visually compelling, easily digestible truth. Third, deep liaison with national security. This can't be an isolated unit.
It needs to be plugged in.
Directly into the National Security Council Secretariat. This ensures the messaging is always unified, aligned with overall strategic objectives, and responsive to the highest levels of decision-making. No more mixed signals from different government arms during a crisis.
Right, agreeing on the destination and the playlist before you even start the road trip.
That's a perfect analogy. And finally, continuous training and development. This capability can't be static. The information environment changes constantly.
New platforms, new tactics.
Exactly. So constant exercise, simulations, crisis response rehearsals, building and updating playbooks, adapting to new tech, new disinformation tactics. It's like war games. But the focus is on information dynamics, hashtags, headlines, deepfakes, the whole complex picture.
Okay, let's bring it back to Operation Sindor specifically. What are the absolute key lessons the material argues we must take away from that event, looking through this narrative warfare lens?
Well, Sindor was, as we said, a military achievement. Terror camps hit, escalation managed, check, check. But the narrative aftermath, that was a stark, vivid demonstration of the existing vulnerabilities. Pakistan's early dominance showed just how effectively a timely lie, a well-crafted false narrative, can outrun the truth in today's information environment. It just moves faster.
And that persistent both sides framing we talked about in the global media.
That's a critical lesson, too.
Yep.
It really diluted India's moral authority, its justification for the action, by equating a targeted response to a brutal terror attack with the attack itself. It creates this false equivalence globally.
It's like saying the person who throws the first punch and the person who blocks it and pushes back are somehow equally responsible for the fight.
Precisely. It completely ignores the initiating act of aggression, the terrorism, and the delay in India releasing its comprehensive evidence package. That cost crucial ground in shaping global perception early on.
And the material also highlighted the narrative role of those drones Pakistan used, right?
Oh, absolutely. Sending, 300, 400 low-cost drones. That wasn't just a military tactic. It was, in large part, a propaganda move.
Creating visuals.
Creating dramatic visuals, creating headlines. Even though the material indicates India intercepted something like 90% of them.
A huge success rate, actually.
Technologically, yes. But the sheer number launched allowed Pakistan to push their aggression narrative, using those images of swarms being launched.
And India's own counter-drone tech things like the QRSAMs, the quick reaction surface-to-air missiles, its indigenous drone capabilities, they're sophisticated. But that story, the story of successfully neutralizing that threat, it didn't seem to cut through the noise as effectively.
It's exactly. Pakistan's visual spectacle of launching drones overshadowed India's less visual but arguably more significant success in shooting most of them down.
So a dedicated narrative force could have.
Could have seized on that. Taken that defensive success, we effectively neutralized 90% of this incoming threat and turned it into a powerful counter-narrative, highlighting India's defensive capability, its technological prowess. It could have been a global PR coup, frankly.
Like posting that slow-mo video of your cricket fielder making an impossible catch midair. Pure flex, but with strategic value.
Exactly. It demonstrates competence and control, countering the narrative of chaos or aggression.
And zooming out a bit, this isn't just about specific border incidents or counter-terror ops, is it? This narrative struggle impacts India's entire standing as a rising global power.
Fundamentally, you simply cannot claim your place on the world stage. You can't be seen as a leading power if you consistently let others write your story for you, especially during critical moments.
And how did other global players react during that May 2025 period?
Well, the world was watching closely. China observed, you can bet they were taking notes for their own informationized warfare playbook. The U.S. helped broker a ceasefire, but its media often defaulted to that simpler escalation angle. Even allies like Japan were reported initially citing Pakistan's unsubstantiated claims about downed jets.
Because that was the information available first?
Often, yes, or the loudest information. A dedicated force could work seamlessly with diplomats, feeding them validated information in real time to actively correct the record with allies, with international bodies, through global media partnerships, deploying evidence, counter-narratives, context.
And what about the domestic angle, inside India?
That's important too. Misinformation doesn't just confuse the outside world. It can create confusion, anxiety, even doubt within India itself. The material suggests some people in India apparently bought into aspects of Pakistan's narrative, maybe questioning the strikes.
Yeah.
A dedicated force providing clear, credible, timely updates directly to the Indian public builds trust. It inoculates against enemy propaganda.
It's like making absolutely sure your own family knows what's actually for dinner before they get confused and decide to order takeout based on rumors.
Right. And it's the most effective weapon against that incredibly frustrating both sides trap in media coverage.
Yeah, the outlets framing it as just tit for tat, burying the lead, which was the initial terror attack, Al Jazeera giving platform to Pakistan's claims, downplaying Pahalgam.
It's like saying Batman and the Joker are just two guys with slightly different political opinions on urban planning.
Exactly. It completely distorts the moral and factual reality.
And a narrative force fights this. not by matching propaganda with propaganda, but by ensuring the truth is presented so effectively, so quickly, so widely, and with such credibility that it becomes impossible to ignore or to reasonably equate with blatant falsehoods.
Huh.
It's about winning the conversation based on facts and context.
So the path forward, as this material really maps it out, creating this kind of force isn't like a luxury item. It's not an optional add-on.
It's a fundamental requirement, a necessity for operating effectively in the 21st century. Your adversaries are operating 247 in the information domain. The stakes, as we've discussed, are only getting higher.
Right.
Operation Sindoor showed India's military resolve, its capability. Huge strides there. But it was also this vivid, almost painful reminder that military wins alone aren't sufficient if you lose the narrative war. You risk sacrificing the strategic impact, the political capital that your actions should have earned.
And just to reiterate, this force isn't just about playing defense, reacting to lies.
No, not at all. That's part of it, the rapid response. But it's equally, maybe even more importantly, about building sustained influence. Shaping perceptions proactively, telling India's own story, its values, its goals, its perspective globally in a compelling, consistent way.
And it has to navigate India's democracy.
Critically, it absolutely has to be designed for India's democratic landscape. This isn't about controlling the media. It's not about silencing dissent. It has to be an incredibly effective, credible, agile truth delivery and context-setting system, operating within democratic norms but with strategic purpose.
It sounds like crafting the perfect biryani. Success depends entirely on having exactly the right ingredients, the right timing, the perfect execution. Get one part wrong and it doesn't quite work.
That's a brilliant analogy. And the crystal clear takeaway from all this material, the core message really, is that Operation Sindoor, while that military success, was a definitive wake-up call for the narrative domain. Military victories are essential, yes, but narrative victories are now equally critical. The world needs to not just see India's actions. It needs to understand and ultimately believe in India's story.
So summing it up, the core problem laid bare here is this vulnerability India has in the global narrative space, despite its growing military and economic strength.
A clear vulnerability.
And the proposed solution, framed as a necessity really, is establishing this dedicated, expert narrative warfare force, its job, ensure the truth gets told, and told effectively at the speed of modern information.
Precisely. To be as strategic and proactive in telling its story as it is in its military and diplomatic actions.
And you know, what this whole deep dive, drawing on everything you've shared, really leaves us pondering is this thought. In the complex, hyper-connected world we live in, this modern age of conflict, maybe the ultimate victory isn't just about winning battles on the ground anymore. Maybe fundamentally it's about winning belief, winning the story. That's something truly powerful to consider, isn't it?
It really is. The battle for belief might be the defining contest.
Thank you so much for walking us through this fascinating and frankly critical topic today. I really appreciate you bringing all this material together for our deep dive.
Always a pleasure. It's a vital conversation to be having.